The Taliban had come up and said that they were going to attack us at 10 o'clock. Our guys had got on that. It had been distributed across the call sign. So we were expecting to be hit at 10 o'clock. We were watching their families and all that sort of stuff leaving the village. So we knew it was going to be a big one. It was going to be game on. As the 10 o'clock came, their families are still walking down this creek bed. They started shooting, and the shooting went straight over the top and then towards their families.
Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
The single greatest sacrifice I've made is my family.
We weren't out there to take country. We were out there to do something. That was our job.
I did feel a lot of regret.
Friends were still getting killed.
It got to the point where, you're going to funerals quite often.
Do I lead under fire?
And that was a heavy responsibility, I guess, on my shoulders that I didn't want to screw up.
War itself is horrific. It's a horror story. It should never be dressed up as if it's something glorious.
Not what you can do for yourself, but what can you do for your country.
The volunteer for service was in effect to put your life on the line.
Peter Rudland is a veteran of the Special Air Service Regiment and the Commandos, for RAR bracket Commando, and when they became the 2nd Commando Regiment. Over a long career in Special Forces, Peter deployed to Cambodia, Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan. He was seriously injured in the June 2010 Black Hawk helicopter crash. In his post-service life, Peter is heavily involved in the veteran community as a passionate advocate for physical health to create mental health. He started a company counselling soldiers. He has competed in 3 Invictus Games, and he's an ambassador for RSL Australia. I spoke with Peter over Zoom in February 2024. I'm Alex Lloyd, speaking today with Peter Rudland. Pete, welcome to Life on the Line.
Good to be here, mate. Thank you.
Pete, let's go back to the start. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
So I'm a good West Australian boy. I was born in Northern, in Western Australia, but I tell everybody York because they're the two towns very close to each other, and Northern's horrible and York's fantastic. I went to school in Perth, so I spent most of my time growing up in and around Perth.
And what did you sort of gravitate towards as a child? Were you sporty? Did you love your studies? Did you love just adventure, the outdoors? What were you like?
I wish I'd loved studies. I hated them. I was very sporty. So Aussie rules was the weapon of choice. Loved playing it, had a football in my hand 24/7. When it wasn't football season, I had a cricket ball or a cricket bat in my hand 24/7. So between the two, hugely fanatical across Aussie rules and cricket. Watch cricket all the time now. Don't seem to get much time to watch the Aussie rules stuff.
Do you have any military history in your family?
Yes, lots of. So when I joined the Army, I was the 22nd member of the Rudland side of the family to join the ADF. Long history there. My adopted dad, he was World War II. So an infantry guy, Second World War, and that was mainly my focus. I was a legacy kid growing up, so I think from having that background, I was always going to join the Army.
22nd, I mean, I'm sure there's some uncles and cousins and things like that make up that clan, but does that stretch back beyond World War II? Does it go back to World War I or earlier? Or
that goes from when Rudlands first started coming to Australia. So 2 brothers come as convicts, and then I suppose, there was off breaks of there that started. So a few years ago, one of the family members did a book on the family. The main thing I was really interested in, the input I wanted, was how many military members there had been, that were a direct sort of link. And that's what they came up with me as the 22nd. So as a young fellow, I learnt that in my teens. It made me extremely proud. And I thought, well, this is a good pathway for me. This is where I want to go.
So you're not very academically inclined, as you were saying, but even then when you're in history class, say, learning about Anzac Day and the World War I diggers and things like that, do you then take those lessons and then also the very real family lessons in front of you and those stories, and that forms that kind of real interest in the military? Is that what started for you?
Where it really started was that as a young fellow, when I looked at the sacrifices made by Australians, how we grew as a country, because it's especially the World War I guys, guys from all around this country had the same values, come from all different backgrounds, by their thousands lined up to join the Defence Force, to do what they seen as protecting the country and the mother country. And I think that our defence history is really what shaped the country we are today. And I suppose you sort of pay homage a little bit to that. I enjoyed learning about particular things that people did that made us great. So it sort of stuck. And for some reason, they were the things that I could remember easily at school. So it seemed, again, the right pathway to go.
And so when did you join the army?
I joined at 17. So at 16 and 9 months, I was sitting at the steps of recruiting in Perth, waiting to get my paperwork, grabbed my paperwork, filled it out, handed it in, counted the days till I left.
Very eager. So you joined 1989, you go into the infantry corps, end up with 3 RAR. And then those first few years in the early 90s, we're having some overseas deployments with peacekeeping and things like that. We're coming off the back of what was known as the long peace. Was this just you're in green and you're training and learning new skills, and sort of, was it just living the dream, or what was those first few years in the army like for you?
I suppose the first couple were finding where I fitted in and what I wanted to do in the long scheme. As a teenager, I always had a really strong interest I wanted to be a tunnel rat. I thought it would be the best job that you could do, in that confined space, your own skills. If you fail yourself, you're the only one who's really going to pay for that. I liked the whole idea of that autonomy that came with that. So I always had that in my head, when I went into defence, that's what I wanted to do. But then when I got into defence, I found out that tunnel side of things was engineers, and it had been stopped. Somehow got into my head that pioneers still did that type of thing. I was only a kid, I was 17.
Reading history of Vietnam and getting really swept up in the tunnel rats, and yeah.
As a legacy kid, there was a lot of Vietnam veterans, and they used to speak to us. And one of my very good friends, Doug, his dad was a tunnel rat on a tour of Vietnam, and I loved hearing the stories that his kids had told, that he had told them. And it just seemed that it'd be something that I'd want to do. After realising that we didn't have that anymore, I knew exactly that I wanted to go into the infantry, sort of laid my pathway clear from there. I wanted to have a crack at SAS at the first opportunity that I could, and that's pretty much how it all happened.
How old were you when you attempted selection?
So I did a selection at 22.
Very young. The SAS selection process is famous or infamous for how arduous it is and the grueling nature of it. And it had a format that, had tweaks, but didn't, I don't think, change too dramatically over a number of years there. Can you tell me a bit about your experience on selection?
Selection was probably one of the hardest things that I've ever done. The standout thing was there was 160 odd of us to start with, and I had known a few staff who were on the selection training stuff, and they told me that there was only vacancies for 7 guys in the regiment. Seeing 160 odd people turn up on the day, older guys, fitter guys, it really threw me. I thought, well, did I just waste 2 years of training? Because effectively that's what I'd done. I'd been given the opportunity to go for 93, and then I deployed to Cambodia, so they just rolled me onto the 94 course. But I had to continue that training regime to make sure I was fit enough. The first day was unique, looking around at all the other guys who had been corporals, been sergeants. I thought that I'd wasted my time, to be honest, is probably the clearest way to say it. A few days into the course where a lot of those guys started pulling the pin and the numbers started to dwindle down, and you started to look around those who were left, and you thought, well, I'm actually in with a fighting chance here. There was a good bunch of us who got through. There's about 20 of us who were bayonets who got through the course. There was such a broad spectrum of guys. You had the really fit guys, you had the little skinny guys, you had the tall guys. It was enlightening to see that diversity across who got through.
And when you reach the end of that, do you feel satisfaction, pride, relief, all the above? What's going through your mind when you reach that at the end and you're told that you've been selected for further training?
In my particular case, what they did was they lined us all up, and so they called out our names, and those who weren't called had to go off to a side. The sergeant at the time, he turned around and said, in case you guys haven't worked it out, these are the guys who passed. So there was that awesome feeling of we're going to get to go on to the next stage. Monday morning, turn up for your patrol weapons course type thing. But then there was that realisation that I had friends who were standing in the other line, and they didn't get through. Pretty happy for myself, but I was also pretty sad for my friends who I'd known who had worked really hard but just didn't get through.
I think in the nature of things like books and podcasts and storytelling in general, we always hear from the guys like yourself that passed, but we also know the statistic of how the vast majority don't even make it to the end of the course, let alone, and even if people do make it there, they still might not be selected for further training for whatever reason. There is that very large number out there that put their hand up and give it a go, and we don't actually often hear from those guys, so I can imagine you feel it's that sort of loss of brotherhood in a way that, I get to go on and fulfill the dream, and I feel bad for my mate who can't. You're in a period of time where there's less access to information, so you would have heard, I'm guessing, like whispers or, gossip of how these courses are run and things like that, but you wouldn't really have known what you were getting into ahead of it.
I was pretty lucky because I was a legacy kid from WA, and the regiment's in Perth, and they used to support the legacy camps at Bustleton every January. there was quite a mixed bag of guys who turned up to help on those camps. And in my case, I was really lucky because one of them was the Wing Sergeant Major and one was the Squadron Sergeant Major, but training squadron. I did get a great opportunity to ask them questions, to learn, to focus what I was doing with my training. And also being a legacy kid, there was a lot of legatees who were ex-regiment in WA as well, who were more than happy to give up their time and help me. It was very beneficial, and I owe a lot to those guys who spent time helping me.
And at this point in the regiment's history, it's still got that legacy of long-range patrol, reconnaissance, and that elitism of being able to do the job, but also it's not door kicking, it's not going in guns blazing necessarily. It can do that, and I know there's the counterterrorism aspect of it, but it is also, you got that legacy of the Phantoms of the Jungle era still very high, and then in 10 years' time, when they make it to Afghanistan, they're still starting with that long-range patrol recon side of things before a bit later the kill capture stuff takes over. What was the sort of training like, or just the mentality of learning this vast array of skills, because you need to handle weapons at an elite level, then you've got all this sort of hyper elite level of recon skills that you're learning. It would have been just such a fascinating range of things to tackle.
As a young guy, it was absolutely awesome. Some of the guys who would come and talk to you during your courses were those legends of SAS from Vietnam. So you'd sit there in awe and listen to the conversations and try to learn as much as you could. We had some excellent patrol commanders with just fantastic knowledge who wanted to teach. I had one patrol commander you could listen to him all day. Absolutely fantastic. And every time he spoke, you learned something. It was a good time to be in the regiment for that building and gaining skills. And I suppose into the operational tempo in later years, it was totally different. I left the regiment in 2000. I went across to Commandos and was involved with that transformation into a regular unit. And that was an amazing thing in itself as well. Loved being a part of that, and I loved the opportunity to be a part of it.
You describe a very sort of positive, supportive, happy SAS culture at the time as well. It's all very supportive, and the regiment is stronger for all of you having each other uplifted and skills raised. Before we move on with some of your deployments with the regiment, I just want to quickly circle back to Cambodia, because that's significant, because it's your first overseas deployment. I mean, is it your first time going overseas at all in life? Even ignoring that, just what's the military aspect of that like? What are you doing in Cambodia in 1993?
So it was my second time going overseas. I did a Butterworth trip with Alpha Company 3RR, which was, as a country boy, just joined the army. That was a real eye-opener, just seeing how everybody else lived in the world, and a different set of rules and a different type of culture. Loved that. Had an absolute ball. Then as far as picking up the Cambodia trip, I was really lucky. There's only 7 guys went from 3RR, and I sort of knocked off for the day. Funny enough, my next parade was actually to go on the 1993 selection course. So I'd spoken to the RSM, the CO, they wished me luck and that type of stuff. Gone back down to my room, and then someone came down my room and said, "Oh, RSM wants to see you." And I got up there and there was a bunch of other guys. There was about 5 standing there. And we were all like, "What have we done?" And I'm thinking, I was only here a couple of minutes ago. Like, what's going on? The RSM called us in and said, "You guys have been selected to go to Cambodia. Any dramas?" And I sort of said, "Well, I was supposed to attend the selection course starting Monday." And he goes, "Well, make a choice, mate." I rang the regiment, asked them what's the best course of action there. And the sergeant I spoke to, who ended up being my troop sergeant many years later, he said, "Go and get the experience, mate. You can always be panelled again." I said, "Yeah, I'm really, really keen to go to Cambodia. I'm honoured to be picked." A few weeks later, we started that cycle to deploy, and we got to go. That trip was great. I can't say enough about that particular UN trip. Was fantastic.
I think that's also a real mature decision at that age. You've got the goal, the passion for doing the selection process and all that. Oh, and obviously you're enthusiastic about Cambodia, but you recognise the learning opportunity there, and that's going to add to what you bring to the regiment when you eventually stump up for selection. Moving ahead then, so you do selection 94, and then 1997 you deploy to Iraq with the regiment. For some of our younger listeners, can you remind us what was going on in Iraq at that point? Because this is obviously before things were kicking off in the 21st century. What was the occasion here?
Long story short, so there was a bombing campaign that took part over Iraq. So most of the coalition were in Kuwait, and then they were flying sorties over the top of Iraq. And as part of that, there was the potential for down pilots. So we went across. Initially, there was a squadron, so one squadron went. And then when they rotated out, there was elements of 2 squadron, and we were called H Troop. So there was 1 free fall, 1 vehicle mounted, 1 water op, and one Kiwi patrol. They joined as part of the troop, and we went across and we did all of that training for, recovery of the downed pilots and, basically cranking the mission up on where we operated internationally with people, with a coalition force, how that would look, because we would need their aircrafts, we would need their support. It was a really, I suppose, coming of age, that maturity across the international platform for us to be over there and then seeing what other countries had to offer and how we could utilise that.
You mentioned there actually the different sort of air, land, sea specialties. Which one were you?
That was freefall.
Are there any standout memories or highlights from that deployment to Iraq?
I suppose the standout was a funny one. We were doing some training out in the desert and we were running in full mission profiles. We were all in a Chinook. So we were separated across two different Chinooks and we were coming in on a target and we were given the 6-minute mark. And I was sort of standing in the doorway next to the US Loadmaster, and we got another 6 minutes and another 6 minutes. And then the aircraft started to do some really quick moving around. And we're thinking, what's going on out there? And go to 3 minutes and then back to 6 minutes. And we were all standing there looking at each other and it cracked on. And anyway, we went on, did the full mission profile, came back, and the pilots grabbed us and said, oh, we should have a bit of a chat what went down. And we're like, oh, okay, yeah, what's happened? And one of the SAM sites had locked onto us. So they had gone into those evasive manoeuvres and the fast movers had then stepped in and eliminated the SAM site. We had no idea what was going on. So it's always stood out as one of those funny when we were standing around later going, oh, interesting night.
Probably a good thing you didn't know what was going on at the time as well.
Yeah, the window or the aperture on the Chinooks is pretty small. So you would have had, every member of the patrol just trying to get their head out the window to look to see what was going on. It would have been funny.
That's a funny visual. And so you continue along with the regiment for a few years there. And as you alluded to before, you then move across to the Commandos when 4 RAR is sort of re-raised as a Commando Regiment. And for listeners, 4 RAR bracket Commando then later becomes the 2nd Commando Regiment. Now, I know that SAS personnel were used to sort of help with that re-raising, obviously bringing that Special Forces capability to train and pass on some of that and oversee, I guess, some of those early learnings in those early stages. Tell me about that transition period. What made you move over to the East Coast?
So I'd basically done 2 cycles with the regiment and I got to a point where I wasn't really enjoying life. I was contemplating a discharge. I needed a change. I'd had a personality clash with a patrol commander, and from there I just started making mistakes regularly, and I sort of just sunk into that rut where life wasn't good. My SSM said to me, instead of a discharge, mate, why don't you think of doing something different? Commandos, raising your regular capability. He'd been a CSM in the past, a part of the reserve capability. So it started me thinking, I wanted to continue to soldier. I needed something new. I just wasn't sure what it was. And this was the perfect opportunity. I stuck my hand up, went across. I was lucky enough to go into the sniper cell. I had that sniper background and absolutely loved it. The guys who were there were so eager to learn. They had really been stuffed around with the INAFET Timor stuff because they didn't have operational serials at that time. They didn't get the gig. They missed out. They, subsequently went, I think it was 2001. I should know that date, I was with them. They were just really keen to express themselves, to show that they had the goods and to show that they could raise the capability to be world class. And that's exactly what they did. Those young guys that were coming through just applied themselves so well. And that was a great thing to be a part of. It was a great thing to be an SAS, which was an established unit. And I had so much pride to be a part of that. But to see a unit grow and to be involved with that development will probably stand out for the rest of my life as one of the greatest things that I've ever been a part of. What the unit is today and what they achieved in Afghanistan was absolutely amazing.
So by the time you deploy to Timor with the Commandos in 2001, what's your role?
So I was in recon snipers still. The platoon itself, I think, had 5 or 6 patrols. So when we went across initially, the CO wanted sergeants as patrol commanders. So I was a patrol 2 IC. I had an excellent patrol commander and a great bloke, Bramwell Connolly, and then they split the patrol and I ended up getting my own patrol towards the end of the tour.
I know Bram, and we've had him on this show before. Tell me about some of your experiences in Timor that stood out for you.
Yeah, there was a lot of patrols along the border, which is primarily what we were there to do, to police that border. It was a good green rolls patrol. We got out there, we got to move slowly, we got to do all the skills that recon snipers do, except for shooting. At the end of the day, there was very little shooting, and we didn't get to do any, actually, my patrol. as far as I know, any of the other patrols in recon snipers for that particular tour. So it was just really perfecting those skills in a threatened environment. It gave us a great opportunity to be with the people, learn about the people, learn about what had taken place during that Indonesian occupation. It was a maturing, best of all for the unit, for 4RAR Commando at the time, to sort of bond and find its leadership and find that platform on how everything worked. It gave a good operational maturity at that minor level to start moving into further operations down the track.
Was Timor kind of deployment to solidify for RAR in its new capability, do you feel? And so by the time Afghanistan and Iraq properly sort of kicked off, they'd had that experience there to get ready to go to something much more warlike?
Actually, I'd say completely the opposite. Because the unit didn't have a lot of commando qualified guys and they hadn't met the operational serials they were driving towards, the unit raised as an infantry battalion. So we were getting guys straight out of Singleton, we're getting guys from other units to fill that manning void. So we deployed in a rifle company role, a rifle battalion role. So guys didn't get to do the commando elements. We were just there as an infantry battalion. But what it did was it gave those guys who were qualified some operational experience, and it made the unit gel a little bit more. So when we did return to Australia, the guys who were in the unit were given the opportunity to do selection and then come in as very qualified members into the unit for that transition further into the commando side of things. And for those who didn't want to do that, they could then, post over to 3RR or any of the other battalions and continue their careers in that space. It was a real turning point, but it also gave the unit a bit of credibility. The guys had gongs, they had operational experience, and it was a good platform moving forward.
And were you in Timor when 9/11 happened, or was that before or after?
In the last couple of weeks of the tour, I had a small medical problem and a divorce. I elected to come back, deal with the divorcee side of things, and the medical thing, I had to go into hospital and have a small operation. I had come home a few weeks early. I was in hospital at Holsworthy, recovering from that. That was when 9/11 happened.
You obviously had other things on your mind at that point. Tell me about your recollection of that day.
When I say it was a small procedure, it was a relatively small one, just an uncomfortable one. So it sort of had to have, so it wasn't really, consuming much of my mind. As far as the divorce was coming, I knew that was coming. That was what it was. I'd had plenty of time to think about it in Timor. I woke up at, I think it was about 2:00 in the morning, flicked the TV on, couldn't sleep. There was this footage on, and I was thinking, what's this? Weird movie. So it turned over, it's on the next channel, turned over on the next channel, like pretty much everybody in the world experienced. At that point, I realised what was going on, spent the rest of the day laying in bed watching the feed come in. Who would have thought, really? Who would have thought something like that would happen?
When you're watching all this and processing just the shock of it and such the scale and so unexpected, do you start to think, well, we're going to be busy because, American ally and all that, or are you just so absorbed in horrific imagery?
I think anybody who's a professional soldier understands that the space is going to change when something like that significant happens. It did run through my head, what's going to happen here? Or will they look to retaliate? And how does that look in a military sense? How would Australia then change our capabilities to match what potentially could be required in the future? Those sort of things were answered fairly quickly for me, I suppose, as we watched how defence then reshaped the domestic counterterrorism capability, Tag East, Tag West. They were on the table pretty quickly, and they'd also been on the table beforehand, and they were, I suppose, common sense that had to happen, having a tag on the east side and the west side. How would that expedite that development? They were really the questions that I was asking myself.
And then over the next few years, you're obviously still with the Commandos, and I'm sure there's a lot of tag training and all that kind of thing. Somewhere in there, you also find yourself on exchange with the British military. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
That was a stroke of luck. The RSM had been pomilateral. So he'd come across, and he was a great bloke, and he knew the issues. So with the guys deploying for the Iraq War, I was still dealing with the divorce, and it was a bit of a mess. So when they were looking at who was going, I had to withdraw from that. I had to deal with the mess that I'd had in the family situation. I'd withdrawn from it. And then my RSM said, will your court proceedings be done by this date? And I said, well, there's a possibility. Why? What are you thinking? And he goes, mate, there's a long trip coming up. I'd like to send you, and that'll give you the opportunity to get away and just see something different and get away from what's been happening here with the court stuff. So that worked out beautifully. I went for custody of my children, and I didn't get them. So I deployed to the Brits, and on arrival in England, There was a sergeant waiting at the airport to meet me. We all sort of split up into different places. I got grabbed by this guy and he said, look, you're coming to work with us. It's a few hours drive to where we're going, to Catterick. I'll give you a heads up for the drive. So he did, and he told me that they were deploying to Iraq and asked me if I was interested. The obvious answer is yes. I got to Catterick. There was a WO1 who was part of the leadership team for the unit. It was a unit called 473. They were established during the Cold War to be behind the enemy lines. So they dig in, the enemy push over the top, and then they call in fire from behind. There was only about between 4 and 6 patrols from memory of the guys. So you had this SASY1, you had a major who ran the unit. He sort of said, look, we're deploying in a few days. We're keen for you to come. You can fix a couple of capability gaps for us, sniper stuff and that. So, yeah, definitely. I got to deploy, so I had to do it's called a third country deployment. So get all that sort of stuff ticked off. I did the training with them at their urban facility stuff, and then we deployed. So we went into QA. They have what was called Eagle camps and a whole bunch of camps out in the desert. We were all separated between those camps. From there, we then went into Iraq when the opportunity came.
That sounds like a fascinating role. Can you tell me a bit more about the deployment experience itself?
The thing that I liked the most about it, and also disliked the most about it, it's funny, they should be the same thing, but you think about a deployment. So you're going to another country, you're going to serve with those guys, you'll learn new things. When I went with the POMs, I had this expectation of the equipment they had and the way they did business, even though I'd never really worked that intimately with them before. But all of a sudden, you've got one Australian who's embedded within an organisation, and you've got to learn their drills. You've got to do all the things the way they do it. That was really interesting, but it can also be lonely to an extent as well, because nobody around you have history with. You're thrown into the deep end with these guys, and anything they say, you have to take as gospel until you learn different. Unique in that side of it. The other side was working with some of the guys. I got to show them what we do and how we do it, and they really liked it in some cases. Some cases, they think that what they do is best, and that's fair enough. So it was great to be able to show the guys, to interact with them at that ground level. I think one of the things that I really liked with the bombs was that, everybody had that different voice. So part of a patrol, everybody came from a different place with such a diversity of voice. For an Aussie, it was really hard to understand what they were saying, especially the Scots. Some of the Scots are unbelievable.
I'm Australian, but I'm a Scottish Australian, born there, and I know what you mean. So you're having a crash course in that skills. It's not so much acquisition. It's learning a different way of doing things, say, and you're having to acclimatise. Do you get to put that to test much in the field?
Definitely. We did a lot. A lot of Australian drills are similar to the American drills. We take our lead from them and we refine it. And one of the things I was always told when I was a young soldier, and even before I was a soldier, from some of the guys in Legacy and that, when you ask that question, who's best? Is it Yanks? Is it POMs? Who brings the most to the table? I was always told that Australians watch everybody. We don't tell them how it's done. We watch how it's done, and then we embed that into what we do. We continue to enhance and improve everything we do. And I think that my time working with not just the POMs, but with everybody, that's something that Australians do. We never tell somebody that's wrong, we do it this, whatever. We just watch and we learn, and we take the little bits out of things and we make what we do better. It was disappointing to a small sense with the POMs. They believed in everything that they did was the best. They thought that things that the Americans do weren't up to as good as what they do. But at the end of the day, when you sat down and you watched the two units side by side, they're both as good as each other. They just did it differently. And I think we do things smart. We never say to anybody, you're doing it wrong. We learn.
I think that's an important attitude to have. Would you say that this Iraq deployment was a bit more hands-on than your previous one?
Well and truly. So the previous one was about that learning to be mature on a different playing field. The second one was getting down and dirty. That was patrols, going out onto targets. We had some interesting targets to go after, and there was a lot of research involved in them. We did some really good jobs in and around Basra. One, it was a lot of fun. There was a lot to be learnt. We had some great guys to work with. There was a lot for me to learn and a lot for me to mature out of. So I really enjoyed it, and I think that I brought back some really good skills that the British showed me that we hadn't sort of touched on. That hugely helped me develop. And I also got to have a small input to the Commando PAM. So when that was being written about some of those drills that the POMs had done that could possibly enhance what we were doing, that was great again. So it had that enduring effect.
So you have this really enriching experience. You come back home and you get to pass on some of these lessons, as you say, and then you're back to Timor with the Commandos in 2006. So what was the difference for, I guess, this deployment versus your one 5 years prior?
The second deployment to Timor was a great trip. That was really cool. I enjoyed that one. That one happened really, really quick. I was down at the parachute school doing some jumping. I'd taken my guys down to get some jumps up. We got the call, come back to the unit. Next minute, we're in Darwin and we're ready to step off. We went in role, so we went in as a commando role. The actual boots on the ground was a mixture of SASR and Commandos in the first aircraft, which was great to have the two units working side by side, and SASR cutting away to do their skills, Commandos securing that point of entry, handing it over to the battalions, and then moving on to other taskings. For that was really good. I enjoyed that. I was a Bravo for that trip, a platoon sergeant. The Alpha Company group was really well led, had Langers as the OC, so you couldn't ask for a better OC. The leadership team as a whole were really, really good. It just added for a good trip. It was a frustrating trip at times. It was quite lengthy. There was periods of good work and there was periods of boring work, sitting around just protecting assets and so on and that sort of stuff. For that holistic approach to the trip, I think it was really, really good. I enjoyed it. And I got fit on it, which was the best, because my boys were all out working their ass off and I was in at the airfield. I was just cutting laps around the airfield and I got to do a heap of training. That was probably the pathway that I ended up going down for doing Ironmans and stuff like that because of that trip. So I do quite like that.
You were in Special Forces in one regiment or another for a long time. You passed selection in 94, and then we're getting into the second half of the noughties. I mean, you will have seen a lot of people come and go. I imagine you'll still have friends back at SAS. You've obviously got your new brotherhood in the Commandos, and there's just a lot of change over time. We're going from the relatively more peaceful 90s to a lot of active deployments and war footing in the 21st century. I mean, was there cultural change over time? Was there just that reality of, you're all getting that bit more wartime experience, and how does that impact on you as individuals, you as teams?
I suppose the transition across the command with having two force elements growing and competing for tasks has made it interesting over the years. Even though when you look on paper, there's a clear line, I suppose, between the two units, but in reality, there hasn't been. A lot of tasking will come down to, and I'll use Afghanistan as an example, and this is just the world according to Peter Rudland, that doesn't make it fact. You would have, say, a Commando CO and RSM on one tour and an SAS CO and an RSM on the next tour. They're going to have a small bias in a lot of cases towards their own unit. The two units were competing for tasks a little bit, and I think there's a frustration that crept in between the units, and it caused an angst. I don't think anybody really knew exactly what playing field they were on. It developed an uncomfortable situation there. With time and maturity, hopefully they go away. I am told that is starting to occur, and I hope it does. The two units should never be fighting with each other over anything. We should always be friends. As the units are growing and expanding those operational capabilities, we need to always make sure that the command join us all together and remember that we're brothers and that we should always work together.
Well, I'm sure on that individual level, there were friendships across the two camps, but it's that institutional tension that was sometimes present, is what you're describing.
Yeah. It's funny enough, I'll say about Commandos, I love being a part of the unit. I love the guys in it. You never hear it from the guys from the east side of the country. They just want to crack on with the job. It is a credit to them. They have great respect for the guys from Perth, and they want to work with that harmony and they want to move on. And I suppose because it's the younger sort of thing, in that development, unfortunately, sometimes you do hear some of the older guys in SAS thinking that they are the senior position. And let's be honest, they are the senior position, but they just don't want to play nicely. And hopefully in time that will go and everybody will play well together.
Which deployment did you have Anzac Day on?
Afghanistan 2010. We were in Gorak village and we actually did a FE Alpha in one building, FE Bravo in the other. We all came together and we did an Anzac morning on operations after there'd been a battle 2 days beforehand, and a reasonably good one. So it was that real feeling of, I'm an Australian soldier, I'm on deployment. This is where it should be. It was a great thing.
Well, let's get to Afghanistan 2010, because you've deployed to Iraq and Timor a number of times and you're sort of finally making it to the big sandbox over in the far side of the world. What were your feelings going into Afghanistan?
I was terribly excited about the trip. I had been down at the parachute school for the couple of years prior to that. That had sort of put me in the wrong spot to get a deployment. When I posted back into the unit, I knew I was deploying with Alpha. The guys had already done a rotation. I knew it was going to be guys with good experiences, and I was hoping that I could bring something to the table and just make the trip a good trip. I was really looking forward to it and did enjoy it a lot.
Can you tell me about some of the highs and lows of the trip, some of the lighter and funnier moments, maybe some of the contacts and scraps you got into?
Before the trip took place, our OC was a guy called Mick Lowe, fantastic guy. Lowy had really wanted to go into Shinatu. Shinatu was lots and lots of Taliban, hard to get into. He'd had a plan. He wanted to go in on choppers. If you try to drive the vehicles in, lots of high ground, they'd fire rockets down on the vehicles, and it was a hard task. So developing that was really good, looking at how we were going to do that as a leadership team across the 2 platoon leadership and the company leadership. We had watched the Dutch, they'd gone in there, and we got to actually physically watch them going through, and they'd been shot up, and the Americans had been shot up a couple of weeks beforehand. We got in there. The battle was quite a significant battle. I suppose the rest is history. It went on to become a battle on it. It involved FE Alpha, FE Bravo. Ben won his VC. There was a lot going on. That was probably the high. I did really enjoy that one, even though my own job was fairly benign. We were up on the hill in our platoon leadership team, and we didn't get to do much of the fighting, but our guys did, and they gave a fantastic account of themselves. So a cool thing that happened there. The Taliban had come up and said that they were going to attack us at 10 o'clock. Our guys had got on that. It had been distributed across the call sign. So we were expecting to be hit at 10 o'clock. We were watching their families and all that sort of stuff leaving the village. So we knew it was going to be a big one. It was going to be game on. As the 10 o'clock came, their families are still walking down this creek bed. They started shooting, and the shooting went straight over the top and then towards their families. So that's not the funny bit. The funny bit is when they realised they had made a mistake and where the rounds were going to, and the chaos that had ensued after that with them trying to stop it. So, it was a bit Keystone Cop-ish. Sitting on the hill watching it go down was quite funny.
That lack of control and discipline on their part and wayward fire. I mean, obviously you're in a contact situation, but you're also just kind of, that's not very professional, obviously. So,
yeah, so I know it was very random. It was a weird sort of situation. I'll give you another funny one. I haven't told the story too many times before. Just made me think of it while we're saying funny stuff. We were on another job. It was Mother's Day. We'd stopped at a place, and I'd made all my guys with a sat phone ring their mums to say Mother's Day and all that. And we'd finished doing that. We jump in the cars to take off. My car's the one up the back, being the Bravo's car. The Taliban had started to talk about they were going to shoot the rear vehicles, and they had some rockets. One of the guys had said to another guy, "Where's the rocket?" He goes, "Oh, I don't know. I put it under a rock." He goes, "Which rock?" There's rocks everywhere. He goes, "I don't know. I can't find it. That's the problem." The guy who had come to fire the rocket, he had been brought from another village to come and shoot the rocket because he'd been trained on it. So he got pretty stroppy with the guy who'd lost the rocket. Now we're listening to him on the radio arguing, and he's totally going off at this guy. We're driving out slowly now, waiting for something to happen and laughing our asses off while they're trying to work out where this rocket is. And then he says to him, "Where are you?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm on Black Hill." And we're like, "Hey!" So we did a crash action with the mortar teams. So the mortars have got out, and there's one obvious Black Hill there. So they fire a round at this Black Hill. They're like, "Oh, where did that round go?" And he goes, "Oh, about 25 metres to my left." So we just did an adjustment and a fire for effect. So he called his own fire mission in on himself. That always stood out as one of the funniest things on the tour. It was an absolute cracker. And they're like calling him. They're like, "Mohammed, where are you? Where are you, Mohammed?" Nothing. So they sang him a little song and he went off to meet Allah.
Amazing. I hear a lot of stories of leadership while doing this podcast, and people talking about great leaders they served under or bad leaders they served under, or if they were in a leadership position, so the responsibility and things like that. One of the best examples of leadership I've heard is getting your guys to call their mums on Mother's Day. I think that's a very sweet little detail. "Hi, Mum. Don't worry. I'm safe in Afghanistan. I'm not, in any danger. Don't worry."
Seemed the right thing to do at the time.
Were you the kind of operator who would just block out life back home and be very concentrated on where you were, what you were doing, or did you keep an open dialogue?
To be honest, I was probably an arsehole in that sort of respect. On every operational tour, I split up with a girlfriend. I suppose when you're on an operational tour, you're focused about what you're doing and you're getting involved with it. I don't think I was that guy who rang home enough. I think I was that guy who didn't show enough concern on the feelings of my partners at home. And I paid for it in that sense. You split up with a girlfriend or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Collectively, over all the tours that I've done and exercises and just being in the military, it made me grow and have a better understanding of the holistic needs of people. I think I got it in the end, but I wasn't good at it at the start. And I think now definitely I'm good at it with what I do, but During my time in the military, I wasn't good enough in that space.
And for the number of, the 5 or 6 deployments that you have, that's quite a sort of toll to build up. Everyone accumulates some kind of baggage or just life experience as they roll on. So if you're feeling that kind of cumulative effect, I can imagine that adds to when you eventually discharge. But before we get to all that, you're having experiences in Afghanistan, some good moments, some fun, I'm sure some testing and trying ones as well. What was life on base like? Did you have so much downtime, or was it all on the job?
Base life, I think, is different for everybody. You come back from a job, you do all of that admin stuff. If you brought prisoners back, you got to square that away. You got to get your gear ready. You got to reconfigure for the next one. Are you going out in vehicles? You're going out in choppers. You're looking at all of what's available. What are you being offered for the next job? What is that tasking and how it really looks once you whiteboard it? So you're busy with that. Orders need to be written. So the patrol commanders are all sitting down doing their bits. Bravos are running around doing theirs. And the Alphas, he's busy doing everything he has to do in that space as well. The diggers, they pretty much sit in their rooms and play COD. They were pretty good at that. Opportunity for them to relax and spend some time playing COD.
I know that a lot of them, would get back and play Call of Duty. I know that's a thing. I just still find that very funny that you go and do the real version of that, then you come and have the fantasy version of that.
The funniest thing is when the guys in the line, so the 2 first doors traditionally, left side was the Alpha, right side Bravo, and then the patrols are all the way back. All the guys are in one room, bunk beds or whatever, and they're all playing against each other. So there's teams, plant patrols, trying to kill off another team of patrol on the show. And they're screaming out to each other like, you Jack, you just killed me, blah, blah, blah. And you're at the end of the room, end of the hall trying to get some sleep. You shut up. So it's just that funny interaction of people yelling out up and down the hallways. And it was a cracker. There's some funny things said.
I remember watching a video on YouTube of Mark Billy Billingham, a British SAS, and he watched some scenes from some of the older COD games that he was just giving feedback on what was accurate, what was a bit fantastical and inaccurate. I can imagine there's a bit of interesting escapism.
The boys definitely had fun. I never had a game. I've never played any video games.
And Pete, your Afghanistan trip comes to an end on the 21st of June in the very famous Black Hawk crash where 3 Australians and 1 American lose their lives. Do you have much memory of that day?
I have very, very little memory of that day. I have very little memory of the day before, just little bits.
On this podcast, we've interviewed Gary Wilson and Renee Wilson as well. And so we've sort of gone in depth about the crash there. We encourage listeners to go and listen to those episodes to dwell on that day more. Suffice to say, Pete, you're injured in the crash. Can you tell me a bit about the nature of the injuries and I just guess the length of the recovery process for you on the physical side?
The injuries, I broke my leg, my rifle embedded into the upper part of my right leg, so through the quad on the inside. So it was between my legs on impact and it just embedded into the leg. I broke my pelvis, most of the ribs on the right side, all my lumbar, all of my thoracic, either in 2 or 3 places, generally transverse process. I'm fused in the back as well with the damage there. Broke my arm, got some damage to my liver and kidney, broke my face, eye socket, cheekbone and my nose. I ended up with a frontal lobe bleed, broke my kneecap on my left side. And they're probably the main ones. Lots of little stuff after that. Long recovery. I was in ICU for a while, working my way through them, and then come out of ICU, got to go to the hospital at Holsworthy, then got to go home from there. It's been just a series of operations over time. I had to learn to walk again and all that sort of stuff. And I suppose the hardest thing was having a brain injury with all the physical injuries to start with, because you don't really understand what's going on and you just know you're really, really broken. During my brain injury, I had a whole mixture of things between thinking I was dead and, a whole bunch of stuff. So it's a complex time and it takes a long recovery. I still, 12 odd years down the track now. We're 13 years since the crash, 13 and a half years. I have a lot of pain. So I really, really struggle with a lot of pain. My injuries always have that flow-on effect. If I, say, work too hard at, say, cycling, for example, I can end up with my back really, really hurting, and then that will then send the signals in my legs or so on. So normally I suppose just the best way to say it is that I have a lot of pain and a lot of stuff is caused around the things that I do now. So
some good days and bad days?
Okay, for example, last night before I went to bed, my right hip was really painful. And I mean, around the sort of 6.5 to 7 level pain. just laying down was causing me, a heap of dramas. And I didn't want to take painkillers. I don't want to be that dude who just takes painkillers all the time to get over it. So I got through the night without that. But I did wake up this morning and I took 150 milligrams of tramadol because I was in a large degree of pain. So I get those sporadic pains, and they can impact your day as having a young family. Like last night, for example, we might sat around and said, we're going to go fishing, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then, come the morning, I get such high pain levels and I can't go. My wife will take the kids, and you feel as if you're not contributing to the family, or you're worried that your kids will think that you don't want to be a part of that family. That's where it can be a bit of a prick. Boy, kids are exceptional. They're very loving, and they understand if I say that I'm in pain, I'm in a shitload. So I do need to sort of back off a bit, and they'll give me big cuddles and tell me they love me and give me a bit of space just to do my thing.
I'm glad you're in such a loving, supportive environment, Pete. That's really great to hear. So the crash happens, 2010. You don't discharge, though, until November 2017. I assume there's a lot of, obviously, recovery in there. Are you actively working at any point with the Army in that, or are you just not kept on the books? How does that work?
Here's the thing. You always hear people say negative stuff about defence, but defence were absolutely brilliant to me. From the point I got hurt, LO stepped in place and they looked after me, and they contributed to looking after my family as well. Couldn't ask for more. The CO, the RSMs along the way provided me with everything. Defence space as a whole wanted to keep me in defence. They kept offering me opportunities. So once I got to a stage, so the RSM SAS said, Pete, why don't you post back over here? Because that's where my family were. I had no family in Sydney. I took him up on that and I posted back to Perth. I went into the 7 shop for a little while and then went across into ops. And I felt as if I was offering a restricted service. You go into work for a couple of hours and then I'd get fatigued. Because of the brain injury, I really sort of struggled to keep focused as well back then. It was great. I got no pressure from anybody. I just was able to do my thing. I concentrated on rehabilitation as much as I could, the physical stuff. I was really well looked after. Then I posted back to 2 Commando. The unit, again, were fantastic and offered me anything I wanted. My schema rep offered me a couple of posting opportunities. So I was, again, being really well looked after. Now, this took space over a couple of years. I was also offered to go back to school, which I did. I went under J43 and went back to school and became a counsellor, and I did business studies. And I found that a lot of people, and my CO pointed this out to me at the time, a guy called Brett Challoner, just a fantastic guy. He said, people always want to sit on the bed and talk to you, Pete, and look for some guidance. Why don't you do something that you can get into that space to do? And that's where the counselling side of it came. Because I had the brain injury, I had to show that I could do things academically. I did a course that showed that I had a cognitive ability. Yeah, once I did that, I got to go back to school. I did the schooling stuff. I was still getting offers from Defence for opportunities in employment, and there was a great one offered to me in Canberra, where I thought I could have had a huge impact, being able to help out. I sort of got to the stage where I felt as if that, and nobody made me feel this way, by the way. This is my own personal thing, because I certainly don't want to put this on anyone. But I felt as if there comes a time that you're only being kept out of obligation. I always thought there was too many people in posting localities around Australia who were useless. They were past their use by date. They were only still in defence because no other bastard wanted them. They wouldn't get jobs in civilian street. They were dinosaurs, and I referred to them as dinosaurs. And I didn't want to be that dude that someone said, in 10 years' time, Pete, we kept hold of him because, he was around, he got hurt, and we wanted to make him feel warm and fuzzy. I didn't want to be that guy. I thought, well, I'm either contributing at a level that it's appropriate and meaningful, or it's time for me to step aside. And so that's the decision I made on one of the welfare boards and said, thank you, I appreciate what everybody's done for me, but I think it's time that I walk out the door. One thing I'll say, the CO and the RSM at 2 Commando said, do you want to be farewelled in the mess? And I said, no. What I wanted was to walk around the unit, and because I was living in Perth at the time too. So they flew me over, I walked around the unit, and I went to everybody that I regarded as a friend. All of those people that I wanted to say goodbye to. Gave them a cuddle, said goodbye. They didn't have my contact numbers, I gave it to them. And then I asked for a couple of hours of the CO and the RSM's time. So I sat down in the CO's office. I spoke about what I'd learnt from the unit, what I was hearing in the scuttlebutt by talking to people around the unit on how they felt, how things could be improved, what was good, what was bad. I said to the boss, the only reason I do this is because I've got nothing to lose now. I'm leaving. I'm appreciative for everything you've done. And this is the way that I would like to leave. If I can contribute in my parting thought, then I've done something good and bonus. But even if I don't, I'm satisfied that I spoke to everybody I wanted to, and I left the way I wanted to leave. I was always really appreciative of the CO and the RSM doing that. And the RSM was a very good friend, and he gave me a gift as I left. I still have that gift and will never lose it. And he gave me a cuddle and he cried. I suppose I was really overwhelmed that somebody I love a great deal, I had a tear in his eye as I was rolling out the door. It made me feel that I had left something that I'd really enjoyed being a part of.
That's a beautiful story, Pete. I'm so glad you had that positive care post-injury and then that really safe and happy transition, because there are sadly legitimate stories of lack of care after an injury or thing like that, and we hear those, and those need to be talked about and discussed, and there's a whole Royal Commission into related issues, obviously. I think there's also plenty of guys like you that had a positive experience and felt that care of the defence family. So I'm really glad you got to have that and leave on such a bittersweet note, a happy note, sad to go, but it was also the right timing for you. You are also someone who strikes me with just such drive to give. I mean, even your last moments in uniform there, so to speak, you're giving feedback to help the body that you love, the unit that you love, progress and keep doing well and doing the best it can. I see that you do that in your post-military career. I mean, just pulling from your RSL ambassador bio online, you started a company counselling soldiers, police and emergency services for post-traumatic stress, depression and other illnesses. You offer personal training, holistic rehab process. I mean, you just sound like somebody who wants to keep giving back. Can you talk to me more about that?
Well, thank you. I suppose I like to help people, which is fundamentally who I am. So that makes that bit easy. The counselling stuff, I suppose the more I spoke to people, the more I was seeing people struggle. And then I got asked to be involved with different organisations that were helping soldiers who were struggling. I suppose a lot of people thought that I was struggling as well because I'd had a brain injury, because I had a significant injury and everything. I never really, I didn't struggle. I've never really struggled with any of it. As I would talk to people, people would come up to me and say, I got so much out of that, or, this is what I took away from what you had to say, Pete. I felt as if I was doing some good. So the more I did that, the more it grew. And I was lucky enough, when I went back to school, I did my residential sort of stage with WA Police in their welfare section. And I knew a lot of those coppers because my wife was a copper and so on. And that was very fulfilling as well. And then I started doing, so I was the training officer for York Fire and Rescue. We would go to jobs, right? Remembering, tiny little small country town. If a house burnt down, we knew who owned it. It wasn't a stranger. We seen the impact of that after. If there was a car accident and there was a fatality, there's a good chance we know who's in that car. There was jobs that one of the guys went to his brother's car accident. He's dead. There's been so many of those type of stuff. And there was no support for those guys or girls. It'd be just us standing around having a cuddle sort of thing. It gave me that drive to be able to at least provide something for these people and to draw upon the experiences I had. If that helped somebody, then that was a win. That sort of progressed, and as I got involved in different organisations, so there was like Pain Australia, I got to tell my story about the pain, and that resonated with a lot of people, and I had a lot of people reach out after I'd done various TV shows or clips and that. Again, that validated what I was doing and how I was feeling, and that interaction. Phil Winter asked me to come on as an ambassador for the RSL. Now, there was nothing put out there on how that looked. Phil gave me the autonomy to sort of feel the space, and it wasn't just about, say, sitting around and talking good stories about the RSL. I got to get out and look at it and where it's working well, where it's not working well, and I get to have that conversation. I get to have that input straight to our leadership teams and say, this is working or it's not working. It made me feel warm and fuzzy and validated me. But most importantly, it showed me that we had I suppose as an organisation, and we'll use this one as an example because the others are doing just as well, but I use the RSL. There were so many people around there who were just like me, who wanted to do the same thing and look after our people. It seemed a really good union, and it has been for me. As I've met more people who have the same drive and the same will to help other people. I see it as a good space. So that just keeps feeding it. Go and do more courses, like, say, the PT course. A lot of the things I've seen veterans sitting around that I knew, and they were fatties. And I'm like, how did you become a fatty, dude? The fittest machine in the unit 10 years ago. I got out and I wake up in the morning, I play with my phone, and then I watch the Today Show, and then I play with my phone some more. What are you doing? Nothing. They've lost that drive. So their mental health is going to keep decaying if that's what they're doing. By doing the PT stuff, I can get out there and show them properly. So I've always sort of shown people, but at least I had the credentials to show them properly, and also the legality if something went wrong to say, well, okay, I know what I'm doing. I've done the course. People's mental health will increase if their physical health is good. That's how I suppose got into the old, RSL active, and then going down doing Ironmans and marathons now. It's created that opportunity, and my physical and mental health is really good, and I attribute that through being in those, and that's why I keep trying to drag others into that space as well. I feel sorry for people because I'm always trying to recruit somebody for a marathon or something. Like, Pete, no, I don't want to do this.
Well, relatedly, you also represent Australia 3 times through the Invictus Games in Orlando, Florida, USA, Toronto, Canada, in which you're co-captain, and of course in Sydney here. And I imagine that was also fueling the same kind of drive, physical health, driving good mental health and rehabilitation.
So the Invictus Games thing is one of the best things that I've been able to get involved in. Back when I first got hurt, I got an opportunity to go to America as part of the Warrior Games pre-selection for special operations, for their special operations. And I went with 2 guys that I absolutely love to death, one guy from Perth and one guy from Commandos. So the 3 of us went across, and our team manager, Vicky, was just absolutely awesome. So 4 people got along perfectly, went to America. Americans did everything they could to help us. The bike coach said to me, I reckon I know something you could do. At that stage, I wasn't into anything physical, like I was shooting and doing those sort of things. I didn't have anything that I'd sort of attached myself to. And he said, mate, I reckon you could be in a recumbent bike. And I didn't even know what one was. He drags one out. It turned out it was an Australian-made bike from Greenspeed called an Aero. So I went for a ride, loved it. But he came back to Australia, said, I want one of these. And then all of a sudden, I get told by the unit, hey, you're going on the Invictus Games. What's the Invictus Games? And they'd been one set of games in London, and the second set was in Orlando, which I'd just been in, 3 weeks beforehand. I got to turn around and fly back to the States, and I went to Orlando, and I did the games. I've told the story 1,000 times. I came dead last. I borrowed a bike that looked like a bus off the Americans because Australia didn't even have one. It really sparked that fire. I was doing something for me. I was riding this trike. Nobody was there helping me or anything, because I was still pretty feeble back in those days. The body was not in a good space. The spark lit, and I went, you know what, I'm coming back on this. I'm going to do another Invictus game, and I'm going to win. So I got back to Australia. I bought a bike. I trained my ass off, and went back to Canada as a co-captain, and I won the 2 bike events that I was in. That really promoted it to really illustrate what the Invictus Games were and what they are, because, they're different for everybody. For me, who had so many injuries and was still really struggling with the content of my injuries and how I see myself going forward, I could go into a room in the Invictus Games with, say, the Americans or the Poms, and then there would be dudes with far more injuries than me. And I had a shitload. It gave me an opportunity to talk to people who had experienced something like me. Because in Australia, I wasn't really getting that opportunity to talk to people with a broad spectrum of injuries. Being in that space with like-minded people, seeing how they had overcome and see which stage they were able to ask questions, that was what the Games brought for me. And that's why I've stayed in it. So I've been involved in every Games except the London Games. So I did the 3 as a competitor and the last 2 on staff. But I like to be able to talk to our own people and show how I got over my injuries as well. But I like that continuing to be able to be across the space. It's a great space. We need heaps more people sticking their hand up, especially those who are really struggling with the physical injury side of things. It gives a great opportunity and a great pathway forward.
Well, I think considering the nature of your injuries and the ongoing pain you have to this day, it's also a real testament that you are not letting that stop you, that you just keep driving forward, keep pushing the physical side and seeing all the benefits that brings and passing that on to others, infecting others with that good physicality. And today, Pete, you are also doing something for yourself. You and your wife and kids are living sort of the classic Australian dream. You're just driving around Australia. Just tell me about the best life you're living at the moment.
We bought a caravan a couple of years ago, and we thought we'd try this caravan thing out. Caravanning was my wife's thing and comes from her side of the family. It's not anything I was interested in at all and never considered buying a caravan. We got the first one, loved it. We kept using it, going different places, having new experiences. So that was good. And my wife said that she wanted to do a lap and do a year doing it. So I said, if we're going to do that, we need to sort of upgrade the caravan. So I took some money out of the super and we bought this one. We left on the 21st of December, heading south, then west, and we'll do the lap. We won't be doing Queensland. I suppose is the best way to say it. We're doing everything but Queensland because we did Queensland recently, and I'll be doing trips back home. We haven't rented the house out or anything like that. We've still got the house. We're still looking after the house. So I'll just fly home from time to time, check on things, and head back to catch up with the family. So it's just nice, relaxed, easy. Is I suppose my very long explanation to say it's nice, relaxed, and it's easy.
And it also sounds calm and, yeah, therapeutic and a nice just getaway from normal life too. So I'm glad you're able to take that time out for yourself and, of course, the quality family time that ensues as a result of that.
One of the things I will pull you up on that one, calm and therapeutic. In all of my Facebook stuff or any posts I do on social media, I generally start with a Facebook update now, or sorry, a family update. My wife is still alive by the grace of God. Whenever I try to back a caravan up, I think about the many ways that I can kill her. It's interesting being in a small space with Tam is unique, as much as I think it's probably unique being with me as well. No, there's no calmness. Having my son and my daughter in the back seat, fighting over the line across the back seat, and a blade of Elkie's hair is on Talon's side and they argue. That's unique. They like to argue every time I start to back the car up to put it in a caravan park or to park it somewhere. Trying to find parking in a long caravan and a long car in a town is unique. There's lots of stress. Jokes aside, it's absolutely great, and we're really loving it, and there's great experiences, but it's not always calm.
When I said calm, I kind of had pictured the end result of you guys are pitched up and, I don't know, and you're having a beer and sort of the really relaxed kind of end point of it. Of course, the getting there. Yeah, okay, point taken.
The other day we pulled up, we're on Great Ocean Road, and we were looking for a spot. We couldn't find a spot. We rang one of the caravan parks. I said, look, I'm driving past. How much is it for a spot? It was Apollo Bay. And they said, unpowered site, $200. And because I've just laughed out loud and go, yeah, thanks for that. Hung up. I was absolutely blown away. $200 for a piece of grass to park on. We went down a bit more and we found this spot right down on the beach. And there was no sign saying we couldn't camp there or anything. Just broadsided on the caravan. The kids have gone down. So we always have a rule. I set everything up. They go and play. Because that way it all goes smooth and nobody end up arguing with each other. They're down on the beach. They're down there with the dog. Tam's down there with the kids. They're doing good family stuff. I've set everything up, pulled the deck chair out, grabbed out a scotch, got a really good scotch, sitting there with some ice, and I'm watching the world go by. And I have to admit, I honestly sat there for that second or so thinking life doesn't get any better than this. It was the perfect spot. It was a spot by pure accident, almost like we were meant to find it. We spent the night there and then well into the next day. The sounds of the ocean, watching the waves roll in, perfect in every sense of the word.
That makes up for all the fighting over the back seat. Perfect. Thank you, Pete, for breaking that trip up just to stop and jump on Zoom and have a chat with me today, for the generosity of experiences and lessons you've shared. Thank you for your service as well and the ongoing service you do in the veteran community today. So thank you, Pete, for coming on Life on the Line and speaking with me today.
Mate, it's been a pleasure. Can I touch on one other thing, though, before we go?
Of course.
So these days, everybody knows my link with the RSL and what I'm doing as far as the Royal Commission into Defence Suicide and the different projects. So there's plenty of projects I'm involved in. A few people have been saying to me in recent history, do I think the RSL's coming to the end of its path? That question really concerns me, that people would ask that. Anzac Day, Remembrance Day, any of the significant days on our calendar, Vietnam Veterans Day, they're all run by the RSL. They're not run by government. They're not run by any other organisation. Legacy, I love and always will. They don't run them. So with all these ESOs out there, if the RSL was to fail, Anzac Day would fail, Remembrance Day would fail, and any other significant day on our calendar. I would hope that any veteran out there listening remembers that all of these things can only happen by all of us still being a part of organisations. I think that a lot of us, we leave defence and we go, we don't want to be part of an organisation. We want to do our own time, and that's fine. But at some stage, if we're going to better our own people and look after our own people, we need to find an organisation. And it doesn't have to be the RSL. I'm not just plugging the RSL, but I am saying that the RSL is what's making things happen. And if you don't like the RSL, be a part of it and change it to what you want it to be or have an input. But I think that all veterans, when we leave defence, we should take our membership up and we should think about the future. If we don't continue to support it, it won't be there and we'll have nothing for our people. After everything I've done with the Royal Commission and everything I've done in the ESO space, the only way forward I can see is the collaboration of all of us. that we come together under the leadership of an organisation or in that organisation to help each other out. Because if we need a Royal Commission into suicide, that means that we're doing something wrong. We are, as a community, we are doing something wrong. We're not looking after our people. We're not valuing our people. And we're making our people feel that they're alone and there's no other option. And I think holistically and collectively, we can stop that purely by coming together.
Well said, Pete. And there has been various points, even in recent history, some lot of fractures in the veteran community. And historically, the RSL was the organisation to go to and bind that community together, to be the voice to government and things like that, and just be that channel, but also be that place to have that brotherhood and sisterhood and to come together. Not to disparage any other institution, obviously. I think the RSL is sort of still rightfully the veteran flagship, and so good on you for trying to unite people together and bring them together, because you're all going to be stronger together rather than apart.
I was talking to Commissioner at DVA. They're working on 6,500 ESOs out there now. 6,500. Now, that can be everything from sort of like, one person in his shed going, I want to help out with whatever. Or it can be big organisations like RSL Legacy and so on. We can all still maintain our identities, but we need to come together and work together and not sit there and keep pointing the finger at each other. We are a fractured community, the veteran community, and we can't stay that way. Somehow we've got to come together. And at the end of the day, it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about all of us. Only together can we do it. I'm going to keep pushing. I am going to keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it for us all to come together. Luckily enough, on Tuesday, I will be in Sydney at a Royal Commission meeting, because I sit on the advisory board for that. And I will be, again, pushing all of us to come together. And I'll continue to do that. To anybody who will bloody listen to me, we need to come together and help each other out.
Good on you, Pete. And I hope that meeting goes well. And I hope shortly after you're back with your family, find a nice free spot to park and have a peaceful scotch.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks for your time today, Pete.
Pleasure.
Early in his army career, Pete dreamed of being a tunnel rat. Our very first veteran conversation was with a Vietnam tunnel rat, the first tunnel rat. Check out Angus Horton's interview with number 1, Sandy McGregor.
It went straight down, so I thought, right, I'm going down this tunnel. And so I got my staff sergeant, who was with me, tie a rope around my feet, and I went head first down the tunnels.
I also interviewed a former commando Pete mentioned in this chat in Season 3, number 47, Bram Connolly.
Well, these guys didn't ask my permission. They just shot him. 1,400 metres, clean kill. And the bomber stopped.
And also check out Thomas Kay's interviews with the Wilsons about their perspective on the June 2010 helicopter crash and their own remarkable shared story. First, listen to the podcasts in Season 4. Number 100, Gary Wilson.
In the 3 months, I'd lost half my body weight. I was below 50 kilos, and this nurse put me back in bed. She goes, Mr. Wilson, you're in a helicopter crash.
And the accompanying episode, The Partners, Renee Wilson.
Then the Padre got out of the car and he introduced himself as the Padre. And I looked at him and I remember thinking, well, I'm fucked. That's it. They don't bring a Padre to tell you that someone's hurt themselves. This is serious.
Thomas followed this up with a joint conversation with Gary and Renee in our Life After Service video documentary series, which you can find on YouTube.
That's sort of what's kept us going together.
I just know you're both on the same side.
Yeah.
You're not fighting. You're fighting with each other, not against each other.
Follow this podcast at Life on the Line Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, at LOTL Pod on Twitter, and at Thistle Productions on LinkedIn. Our website is www.lifeonthelinepodcast.com. Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design. Music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Thank you for listening, and lest we forget.